This is a comparison of all the VFX shots and the amount of artists that worked on some of the largest visual effects masterpieces over the last 20 or so years. Visual effects takes a lot of time and effort to create, and Hollywood blockbusters generally have stacked teams working on these movies for months to get the results that they want. The tools to make visual effects have certainly gotten faster and better over the years, but our appetite for visual effects has also grown. Audiences nowadays expect more of it at a much higher level of quality than was acceptable 10 or 20 years ago. For that reason, we thought it would be interesting to compare the amount of shots against the amount of artists that put those shots together. Quick disclaimer, the data we gathered is based on what we could find available online and a bit of scraping through the end credits of some of these films. I say a bit because counting the usually inaccurate number of artists in the credits would require a level of dedication usually reserved for the deranged. As I'm sure you're all aware, not everyone in visual effects makes the cut to get credited. In fact, I think I've probably been left out of credits more than I've been included. I found that IMDb actually gave an even more accurate representation, but even that is pretty unreliable, as plenty of artists don't link up their IMDb profile to every film that they've had their hand in. Getting an absolutely accurate number for most of this stuff felt like trying to catch smoke with a fishing net, so if you have any classified intel on the accuracy of our dataset, feel free to correct us in the comments. For clarity, each visual effects shot is represented by a single film roll, and each artist is represented by these 3D artist people. Keep in mind that most VFX shots include multiple individual tasks, generally performed by multiple individuals. You might start a shot with some prep work, like roto and camera tracking, and then add some 3D elements that might also require a full team, and then finally you'll have a compositor put it all together. So a movie with over 500 shots is a lot of work, like hours and days, months even, of labor for many artists. Does anyone else watch the end credits of a film and slowly get affected by the existential realization that armies of individuals at a desk slave away for months on end to put every pixel in exactly the right place to meet the director's vision so that they can be rewarded with a little golden statue so the movie theaters can sell you popcorn? No? Just me? I mean, the number of visual effects shots in Avatar alone gives me an anxiety attack just thinking about it. Back in the past, in 1989, Robert Zemeckis sent Doc Brown and Marty McFly back to the future. Between all of the DeLorean time travel shots and lightning strikes, this film ended up with 30 visual effects shots across a team of 50 artists. And just a few years later, Steven Spielberg made CG history with all of the 50 visual effects dinosaur shots in Jurassic Park. 322 artists were tasked to bring the dinos to life, two of which were VFX pioneers Steve Williams and Mark Dippe, who famously animated a CG dinosaur behind everyone's back, showed it to Steven Spielberg, effectively changing the direction of the film and stealing most of the gig from Bill Tippett's animatronic dino model team, and, you know, laying the foundation for what viewers could come to expect out of CGI for the decades to come. But before all of this, a crew of 50 people working on Ridley Scott's Blade Runner paved the way with 90 shots of miniature effects, with everything ranging from sprawling dystopian cities, flying cars, and advertisement holograms, all from the very far distant sci-fi future year of 2019. But even before that, in 1977, George Lucas hired 169 visual effects artists and formed what would become ILM, one of the most prestigious VFX studios in the world today, to complete 360 VFX shots on the original Star Wars. And as anyone watching this is probably aware, the movie broke new ground when it came to visual effects. They basically invented blue screen compositing, non-linear film editing, and motion control rigs, all to make a couple spaceships go pew pew and some laser swords go whom whum. In 1999, the Wachowskis introduced us to Neo and introduced us to the simulation we're all currently living in, The Matrix. With a whopping 412 visual effects shots of bullet time slow motion, CG enhanced stunts, CG extended sets, added effects simulation, and the list goes on, all put together by 137 visual effects artists. This is where we mark a clear move from visual effects as a novelty to the mainstream adoption and heavy usage of visual effects that we start to become accustomed to over the last 2 decades. Just 2 years later, in 2001, Peter Jackson takes us on a quest through Middle-earth and into Mordor, with a fellowship of cosplaying adult men who did not simply take on hordes of orc warriors and cast magic spells and fight fire demon creatures, but rather they all made pretend in a giant warehouse like an overly enthusiastic band of LARPers deep into their 20th session of an intense D&D campaign. While a dedicated team of 407 artists worked tirelessly, even in some cases allegedly sleeping under their desks, to bring 480 VFX shots to life. Oh, and changed the course of VFX by creating the first ever fully CG motion captured humanoid creature fully acting alongside live action actors, and it still kind of holds up. Back in '97, James Cameron made a small indie film known as Titanic. There were a couple boats and one really big boat and some crowd and water simulations, a lot of water. In fact, Jerry Tessendorf, the guy whose name you might see in one of your drop-down menus when selecting wave displacement algorithms in your 3D software, worked on Titanic to bring those CG waves to life. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The real story is that 801 VFX artists worked on these 516 shots. In 2012, Ang Lee and his team won an Oscar for putting a visual effects studio out of business for their work on survival drama Life of Pecan Pie, where a fully CG tiger on a boat spends an hour and a half salivating over the thought of his aunt's delicious pie back home while stranded at sea on a raft with a shirtless pirate boy. 1,261 artists worked really hard to bring us the most realistic animal and ocean we had seen to date in 690 visual effects shots. 2 years later, in 2014, on Interstellar, Christopher Nolan single-handedly captured all of the effects for 700 sci-fi visual effects shots directly in camera, and hired 477 visual effects artists for moral support. This era of VFX saw a rise of multiple different studios collaborating on a movie together and beginning to share assets across studios. The Social Network, directed by David Fincher in 2010, coming in hot with 1,000 shots and a total VFX crew of 89 members supported. We thought that seemed a little low, so we compared it to the end credits, and lo and behold, the total amount of credited artists was actually lower than 89. Quite the scandal. It's really not uncommon for people who worked on the visual effects of a film to go uncredited. Most of the VFX work in this one involved copy-pasting one Winkle Bro onto another, like a digitized frat boy, Lohan-less Parent Trap situation. In 2017, Denis Villeneuve brought us back into the world of Blade Runner 2049, this time upping the ante with a total of 1,190 VFX shots assembled by 1,151 VFX artists across multiple studios. The effects in this one included many more dystopian sci-fi cityscapes, hologram AI girlfriends, and Rachel, one of the best CG face replacements at that time. Harold Pewter and the Dastardly Hallows, Part 2. 2011, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 2 by David Yates. 1,200 VFX shots and a crew of about 1,419 people. What's not VFX in this film? You've got giant people, noseless villains, magic-y wand tricks, deathly eaters, Nevils pulling swords out of their hats, large crowds, and big chunky trolls. Back in 2006, Gore Verbinski and his crew of 665 VFX artists brought us 1,400 VFX shots of pirate stuff in Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest. Among those were shots of one of the greatest CGI characters of all time that still holds up to this day. None other than old Octopus Beard himself, Davy Jones, and countless other zombified sea creature pirates and ghost ships and naval battles, mixed in with some large-scale set extensions among other great effects work. This year, Greta Gerwig dropped one half of the Barbenheimer bomb with 1,500 VFX shots of existentially self-actualizing Barbies in a very pink Barbie world. Apparently only 207 VFX artists were credited here, which seems abnormally low and is likely pretty far from the truth, and according to The Guardian, they were all just hired to play with Barbies and cheer on the construction crew. In 2021, Denis Villeneuve, back in business with Dune, 1,700 shots of large megastructures and sandstorms, immense toothpick-mouthed sandworm, and some dragonfly copters, all shot against some sand-colored screen. At least 543 artists worked for months, if not years, to bring us this visual eye candy. In 2012, Peter Jackson got back into the Lord of the Rings business, bringing us the Hobbitses, with a heavy 2,135 VFX shot count and 1,116 reported artists. This was just a larger scale of your typical fantasy effects. You got some castles, creatures, magic, and typical dragons and wizard stuff. 2019 was a very big year for visual effects. The Russo brothers were hard at work with a crew of 2,207 VFX artists on Avengers End Game. The movie totaled about 2,500 VFX shots of pretty much everything, like man spiders and red witches and strange doctors and people made of metal and big people in suits fighting space whales, alien demons, and wrinkly-chinned villains. The kind of stuff that likely melted a few CPUs and made a few coordinators cry. Avatar: The Way of Water 2023, James Cameron, the man to beat, one-upping the entire industry once again with his crew at Weta Digital and the rest of the studios, totaling about 3,250 VFX shots with a team of 1,084 members. This movie can easily be considered one of the best examples of peak modern visual effects artistry. Water simulations that put Moana, the Titanic, and frankly any other movie to shame. Space alien animations that have somehow crossed the uncanny valley, and just generally wild, jaw-dropping environment work. This movie really is VFX porn at its best. And that's it, 18 epic movies compared. Again, the number can be way off in certain cases. We did our best to find some accurate representations, but it's mostly fun just to kind of get a ballpark figure and see the evolution of VFX over the years at a glance. It was interesting to me, at least, to see how shot counts grew in comparison to the number of artists working on the show. As a whole, it seems to have progressed fairly linearly. The shot counts grew significantly, but so did the crew counts in a similar way.